From filing for bankruptcy and selling for pennies to billion-dollar revenues and million-dollar checks, is the UFC a pyramid scheme? If you look at the UFC today, you'll see the fastest-growing sports organization in the world, a multi-billion-dollar company that puts on massive events across different continents, and a promotion that's given birth to some of the most famous athletes in history. If you've only just begun following mixed martial arts, we'd forgive you for thinking that the UFC has always been a mainstay of the sport, but quite the opposite is true. Just 20 short years ago, the future of what is now the world's premier mixed martial arts promotion was definitely in question. In fact, the UFC might have never made it if it wasn't for the clever strategies of a few select businessmen and a hell of a lot of luck. So strap in while we take a deep dive into the history and inner workings of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The UFC was first established back in 1993 by Rorion Gracie, Art Davie, and Robert Mariowitz. The organization's goal was to find the ultimate fighting champion by staging a single-night tournament where the most skilled practitioners of various martial arts met inside an octagon to prove whose discipline was really the most effective. There were very little rules, no weight classes or rounds, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that the first few UFC events came across like a bit of a freak show. UFC 1 used an 8-man tournament format, with the winner receiving $50,000. Over several years, the organization managed to put on 29 events, but by the year 2000, the UFC's parent company, SEG, was on the verge of bankruptcy and looking to sell. Enter Dana White and the Fertitta brothers. A strange set of coincidences led Dana to come into contact with the UFC, and it all started in Ware, Massachusetts, where the company's future president was born. Raised by a single mother, White moved around as a kid, but their family spent his high school years in Las Vegas, where he and the Fertitta brothers would attend the same school. As a teen, Dana became interested in boxing, and in his early 20s while in Boston, the young man opened a boxing gym. He famously returned to Vegas after being threatened by the notorious Boston gangster, Whitey Bulger, and it was on his return to Vegas that he reconnected with the Fertitta brothers at a wedding. The three of them began training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu together, and it was at the gym that they ended up meeting mixed martial arts fighters such as Chuck the Iceman Liddell and Tito Ortiz. White began managing both Tito and Chuck, who fought in the UFC, and it was through his negotiations with the owner that he discovered SEG's financial situation and that the UFC was up for sale. He approached the Fertitta brothers, who'd already established a successful casino chain, and urged them to buy the organization, convinced that they would be able to make something big out of the failing promotion. In January 2001, the Fertitta brothers purchased the UFC for $2 million through a company they established named Zuffa, which means to fight in Italian. They made Dana the president of the company, granting him a 9% stake in the organization. Unfortunately, they found out pretty quickly that SCG had been trying to get rid of the UFC for a reason. For a few years, the company absolutely hemorrhaged money as Dana and the Fertitta brothers scrambled for a way to make the UFC profitable. Eventually, they found their first success with the first season of the reality TV show The Ultimate Fighter, their last-ditch attempt at making this thing work, before calling it quits. Luckily for them, the show was a huge hit, and slowly the company was able to build its reputation and profitability, acquiring the archives and rosters of its competitors such as Strikeforce along the way. In 2011, the UFC announced a 7-year broadcast deal with Fox TV, a huge step for the promotion that initially had to jump through hoops to get on the air. With the advent of stars like Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey, the UFC's stock rose, and in 2016, what started out as a failing MMA promotion that SEG was happy to offload was acquired by the global sports, fashion, and entertainment leader Endeavor, to the tune of $4 billion. The deal made history as the largest financial acquisition of a sports property ever. To put it into perspective, the Fertitta brothers made a 200,000% return on their initial $2 million investment. After the acquisition, Dana White has retained his position as president of the company, overseeing all operations, from talent acquisition to sponsorship negotiation. He has also maintained an undisclosed share in the company, though it's likely to be much less than his initial 9%. Dana has made his name almost synonymous with the UFC's, And anyone who follows the sport is as familiar with him as they are with their favorite fighters. Since Endeavor's acquisition of the company, the UFC has experienced growth year upon year, signing a lucrative broadcasting deal with ESPN and strategically using digital media to connect with its global fan base. In 2022, the UFC reportedly led Endeavor to more than $1.4 billion in revenue, up 20% from the previous year. With these crazy numbers in mind, it's a surprise that fighter pay has been a controversy that's followed the UFC through all its ups and downs over the years. In December of 2014, several fighters submitted a lawsuit against Zuffa, claiming that the company restricts fighters' careers and earning potential. In 2020, a judge granted the case class certification, so both former and current UFC fighters can join the lawsuit without suing individually. At the time of this upload, the case is still ongoing. You might ask why the UFC specifically comes under fire for supposedly underpaying its fighters, but it starts to make more sense when you discover that other American sports organizations, such as the NBA and the NFL, pay their athletes 50% of their total revenue, while the UFC pays their fighters only 16 to 20% of theirs. Fighter contracts fall into three tiers: low, medium, and high. New fighters often get signed to the lower tier, where they might earn between $10,000 and $30,000 a fight. After some success in the octagon and building a reputation, they may be able to renegotiate to a middle-tier contract, earning in the range of $80,000 to $250,000 a fight. The fighter's popularity and the results of the bout can lead to bonus payouts, which can sometimes double their take-home pay, ranging from tens to hundreds of thousands. UFC champions and fighters with greater popularity get offered the best type of contract, the highest tier, where a fighter can stand to make anywhere between $500,000 to $3 million a fight. These numbers may sound like a lot, but when you consider that most fighters sign in the lower to middle tier and fight a maximum of 3 times a year, their salaries start to seem a little meager. Taxes have to be deducted from their earnings, as well as a large fee that goes toward their coaches and training expenses. When you factor in the risk of serious injury and even death every time they step into the octagon, $10,000 a fight doesn't seem like a lot. White has been called out surrounding issues with fighter pay multiple times, notably by the likes of YouTuber Jake Paul, but the UFC's president has been quick to shut down those conversations. When asked about the issue during an interview with GQ, he said, "It's never gonna happen while I'm here. Believe me, these guys get paid what they're supposed to get paid. They eat what they kill." Former UFC heavyweight champ Francis Ngannou reportedly left the promotion over a dispute regarding salary, as well as a guarantee that all fighters on the UFC's roster receive healthcare insurance. That's just another example of fighters going up against the organization that arguably gave them their big break, but also wouldn't exist without them. So from filing for bankruptcy and selling for pennies to billion-dollar revenues and million-dollar checks, the UFC may not be a pyramid scheme, but that doesn't mean there isn't more to the promotion than meets the eye.